Welcome to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. Executor, a role that's incredibly important, but no one wants, few prepare for, and most think they'll either deal with it or hire someone to take care of it when the time comes. Now, being an executor is about trust and responsibility, both legally and morally. But there's little guidance and less understanding of what to do, or the consequences of not doing or misdoing steps when settling an estate. That's why this practical how-to book is a must-read for people at any stage of their life. Today, I'm joined by Barb Amsden, author of How to Laugh at Death and Taxes, What Executors, Willmakers, Heirs, and Beneficiaries Need to Know. Barb, welcome to Empowered. Thank you for being here today.
It's a pleasure to be here. I've been watching the show. It's excellent.
Oh, thank you. So, full disclosure, during COVID lockdown, I believe is when you were writing the book.
Right.
And you sent it to me to read for typos, edits, errors, or whatever. And I'm very fortunate to have a testimonial in the book. So I'm really proud of that.
No, it's great because, first of all, you do a lot on financial literacy, which is so important. But it's also about, and that's why the show is so great, about empowering people who have been named executors and people that are wanting to write their will. And that's what hopefully this book will help people get done.
Okay, so let's step back then. Laugh at Death and Taxes. Why did you write the book?
So actually, the original title was Keep Calm and Carry On. However, the woman who was the editor suggested this. The reason I wrote it was because my godparents, had great godparents, and I was asked to be their executor with another of their nieces, Betsy Hamilton. Just wanted to give her a call out because she was the great co-executor. So they had a very simple estate, and by that I mean they'd already sold their condo and they were moving into a home. So all they had really was clearing out a condo and then dealing with their money. And their money was all in kind of plain vanilla securities. However, we had one problem after another. First of all, the bank wasn't paying things out on a timely basis. And then the second thing was the assistant of the lawyer was doing things that I could do better just because I was in the financial services industry before. Then we had to deal with the tax accountant who forgot that when a person dies, you have to roll their RIF. That means convert their RIF into basically income as of the date of death.
Let me just stop and say what a RIF is.
Yes,
typically, most people will contribute to their RRSP until they turn 71. When you turn 71, you have to convert the RIF, to RRSP, to a RIF. It's like closing one account and opening another.
Correct.
Your RRSP you contribute to, the RIF you actually automatically need to take money out of.
That's correct. And what's important as well is that you begin to pay taxes that you were able to not pay when you were in the years that you were earning money. And so what it looked like to this CRA, to the Canada Revenue Agency, was that that we had $90,000 in undeclared income. Once you hit that kind of a situation, they of course think that you're trying to hide stuff, which is like we hired a professional tax accountant to do this, but because he died late in the year, there was no paperwork associated with it, he forgot, and so on. So we had to deal with that, and that made the Canada Revenue Agency, it meant that it would go through two different parts of the CRA. And so that took 1,461 days, almost 4 years for a simple estate, where everything really had been made, prepared for them.
And that's the whole thing about when you become an executor. Some people don't know they're executors. Some people recuse themselves and say, you know what, I'm done. But they don't realize that they actually have to sign a piece of paper that actually recuses them because it's a legal document.
Yes. And that's a big surprise, I think, to a lot of people that when you're an executor, this is often the first time you've done it. You don't have the experience, but you know the family, and it is a trust, like you said. And so you can leave yourself on the hook for a lot of money, a lot of responsibility for unpaid taxes and so on. So there really are reasons you can do a lot on your own, but there's a lot of times you should really just make sure that you check off some things with the lawyer.
And, I'm glad that we're talking about this. I had my colleague Cheryl Maloney on talking about being an executor and good, bad, indifferent, whatever the situation is. But I think it's really important to really talk about this thing and discuss it so that people actually understand exactly what's happening. So when we come back from the commercial break, we will be talking more about wills, being an executor. Don't go away. Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. On today's episode, we're discussing Willwriters, executors, beneficiaries. Get ready. Barb, let's get ready.
Yes.
What makes your book different than others?
So I think a lot of people don't understand that as an executor, you have these numbers of responsibilities, but you have got to deal with wording of documents that is in legal wording that's hard to understand. You have to deal with financial institutions that have their whole terminology, and all of the financial institutions have different forms to fill out and so on. And you're also dealing with taxes, and anybody that tried to read the Income Tax Act, all my blessings to you. So you're dealing with many different languages. A lot of people think that, and more so at the current time, that they're just going to pass it off to a trust company, a professional to deal with it. But even if you do that, you have a responsibility about who you hire and monitoring to make sure that they get stuff done right. You're not expected to know everything, but you need to know who to ask and how to get the right sign-offs. So what the book is about and what makes it different is most of the other books about being an executor are written by lawyers, sometimes by financial advisors, and sometimes by tax lawyers. So this is by a normal human being. I like to consider myself that. And it's also, you do have to sometimes just laugh. I mean, that was the only way you can get through with it. And again, my co-executor was great that way. So there is some humor in it, hard to say, but there is some humor in it. Also, there's a lot of tips, checklists, pictures, horror stories. And I think that's the other difference. As I was going philosophical during the COVID period, I realized that there's a lot of quite humorous stories about death and dying and executors in some of the historical books. So this book is easy to kind of flip through and find what you want, but it gives you a little bit of things. There's a good story about Keith Richards in there that that will at least keep you awake while you're reading it. That's I think that a combination of that is what makes it different.
Well, I was thinking how Monty Python-ish of you.
Well, yes,
right?
Yes, exactly. If I could have incorporated the Ministry of Funny Walks, then I would have done so.
Okay, so I know that you've got messages. You have
Yes.
quite a few messages, and let's go through them.
Okay.
What messages do you have for Willwriters?
Okay. So a lot of people think that they don't need a will until, they've got a certain amount of assets. And the answer is wrong. You could get one done now. And the one thing I would say is, whereas before I'd have been skeptical about one of these, paper off the internet wills, there have been a growth in electronic versions of wills that can prompt you and ask the right questions. So I'd say they're getting better. And if you're young, they are definitely affordable, and it can help because you never know when you maybe willed something, and then all of that, let's say money or art or whatever, would, if you don't have a will, it will be divided up according to something called succession law. So that rather than where you would like it to go. And that means it can go to the wrong person or persons. So number one is get a will. Number two is you do have to figure out who could be your executor. And personally, I'm a big supporter of having maybe 2 or 3 executors to split the work. And also then if one decides, like you said, to recuse themselves, you're not going to have to go to court to get somebody else appointed. It saves you time. Third thing is you need to prepare your executor because, again, I didn't know really what to expect, but I knew that I'd probably be able to manage it, but I learned an awful lot. And one of the most important things to do, especially in this electronic world we live in, is you need to have their list. Whereas before you'd have people's statements, it would be easy to find stuff. Now most of things are online. I think there was an estimate, this was a couple of years ago, that people have 150 different passwords and so on. I think now it's up to like 300, and I don't know how they really manage biometrics. My husband did say, you'll be going into an open casket, and somebody was trying to, get a fingerprint to allow someone to access
or facial recognition.
Facial recognition, exactly. So that's the third thing. And then the fourth is, this is not a once and done thing. So even if you have no changes in, by having children or in marriage, et cetera, like John and myself have not had any change in that. But then recently on a vacation, we just said, okay, we've got to get serious about going over our will again. And we in fact changed 50% of the beneficiaries just because things had changed. Right. So you always need to, so even if you use an electronically created will, also the law is changing. So things that were one way before, you need to see, is anything that is changing going to affect you? So there are questions why, and you should look at it at different periods as well as you age, because your executor, you want your executors to be young enough to continue on.
Okay, so when we come back, we're going to talk about executors and beneficiaries and so much more. Don't go away. Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. Today's episode, we're discussing Willwriters, executors, beneficiaries. Get ready. Before we went to break, we were talking about messages for Willwriters. And I think one of the key things, too, is there are so many blended families right now that it's imperative to have a will, because now you've got children coming in from one side, both sides, and then you've got a lot of dual citizens as well. Is your spouse American? Is he Canadian? Is he, from another country? So wills are super, super important, especially in those situations.
Absolutely. And just coincidentally, I was speaking with a friend yesterday, and she had a friend whose mother, after her original first husband died, she remarried. She remarried a man who also was remarrying. And then but they hadn't had a chance to update their wills. So she died within like 2 months, and then her assets rolled over to him, and then he died, and his children basically took all of what really belonged to her assets, not leaving anything. So this is something where I almost think that go from the wedding ceremony, if you're decided to have a ceremony, and then go and update your wills, because you don't want to leave people that you've loved unprotected, because some people don't seem to have, as you were saying, morals and ethics are really important to an executor and to the person that you're choosing to look after whoever you would like to leave your money to.
And that's really important. So let's continue on with the messages. Now you've got messages for executors.
Executors. So the first executor, most people would say, my first advice to somebody who has been asked to be an executor is don't be an executor. But the fact is, you need to be in some cases. It is an honor, and it's very important to having the person who has died live on.
Because you're representing them.
Absolutely. So I would say what's important is to have discussions, whereas apart from just saying, okay, yes, of course, I would be your executor, to say, okay, let's go through what needs to be done to get ready to make sure that I can, manage things smoothly, that we don't have surprises. And you had mentioned earlier about that the title, Wouter may have mentioned earlier that the title on a property hadn't been changed. And these are all these little things that kind of get forgotten along the way and can really delay the processing of an estate. So one is make sure if you're going to be an executor that you prepare your boss, your will maker. The other thing is to understand what your responsibilities are, and they're kind of common sense, which is act without any personal self-interest, to make sure that all of the debts are paid. That's really important, both to financial institutions and so on, but also to the tax. The tax one is the worst because it's important, but you do not want to have somebody coming after you for taxes years after the fact, which is why one of the most important things to do is to make sure that you do insist that you get a tax clearance certificate. The other thing I think is to help them understand, just making sure that you've got everything prepared. The website, the website, the internet, no, exactly. All of their passwords and so on and so forth.
All their social media, everything that they have that they've been using along.
I do think that it can be good to make sure that your children or the other people that care for you know who that executor is and know who to go to. One person, and this the other thing this book has is a number of tips. So one of them was that when this person goes on vacation, she leaves a copy of the latest will with a close neighbor and a trusted friend, and therefore there's not going to be the same kind of scuttling around trying to find out where the will is or go to the bank. But if you don't have the will, the bank won't let you in and into the account. So that's one of the, I think, the important things to do is have that discussion.
We actually have a mutual friend who, when she went on vacation, she had an ailing cat.
Yes.
And we all had copies of the will
Yes.
to make sure that her cat was well taken care of if something happened to her while she was away.
Right. That's exactly it. There's a lot more to be thinking about than most people thought, partly because we moved into different provinces. You were mentioning before also about the, and I wanted to come back to, if you married somebody, for example, from the States, well, and quite a number of Canadians have second homes in the States. And if those are not taken into account within 9 months and that you have kind of declared this, then you could be subject to a very big amount of American taxes. So you need to find out all of these different things.
And we also need to make sure that our pets are really well taken care of when we go, because we don't want our furry family to go to a shelter or anything. So think about that. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. On today's episode, we're discussing Willwriters, Executors, Beneficiaries. Get ready. And I'm joined by Barb Amsden, author of How to Laugh at Death and Taxes, What Executors, Willmakers, Heirs, and Beneficiaries Need to Know. So one more question about messages. So what are your messages to beneficiaries?
So the first one to beneficiaries would be that give the executor at least a little bit of a break, because things do not happen fast. They have to be done in a certain order. It takes a while to actually get access to information, to get the will if it's not, in a way that it's easily accessible, and as well. Whereas there are some deadlines that executors have to meet. In many cases, the people that then have to get back to you, such as the Canada Revenue Agency or the probate officials, say they have the deadlines, but they don't really have to adhere to them. So so number one is, don't expect things to move as fast as you would like and as the executor would like. The second thing is that sometimes you may not know if you're an heir or beneficiary. You may not want to ask. You may be a little bit worried. There are, at least in Ontario, and this book is based on Ontario, but it really has more questions that you can use if you're whatever province you're in and in whatever common law country you're in. So there are things you can do to find out if once somebody has started the probate process. Another thing that a lot of people complain about is the executor that is doing nothing, and I've heard of quite a few of those, or the person who is taking too long, or that is not responding to questions. And in fact, that is one of the responsibilities of the executor, which is to communicate. And it's fairly straightforward to do, but it's an important one. There is something if the beneficiary is not, is not feeling that they're getting anywhere, that maybe there's nothing happening. And in fact, there was a case I'm aware of where the executor hadn't even informed the bank 3 or 4 months later that the person had died, and so was still receiving money into an account. You can do something. Well, you can go to court. That takes time and a lot more money. There's another way of doing something, which is called seeking a passing of the accounts. And that's where the probate people would look at, or ask the executor to account for what he or she has been doing. And that is not cheap, but it's like around $3,000. And it's the best way to try to get them to perform the actions that they should be taking.
Okay, so you arrived with this incredible slide. Can you put a bit more context to this and explain the slide? I looked at it quickly and I saw a little glass of wine towards the right.
Yes. So
what are we looking at here?
So what we're looking at here is, when I wrote the book, I decided I wanted to give some opportunities to some young artists. And I know that you're an artist, have a lot of appreciation for your art.
Oh,
this was done by a 16-year-old woman, young lady in a place near Matisse-sur-Mer. And I just told her, this is what I'm doing. I have all these problems because, you kind of think of things in a, sequential fashion, but in fact, within the estate, you're going forwards and backwards, and all of a sudden it's like the old game, Snakes and Ladders.
Yes.
And so she drew that picture because you may think you're kind of moving ahead, and then all of a sudden you're going back down. So if you look at the person on the left-hand side, you see the kind of beaten down, depressed person who kind of gets his way up and down and so on until you end up with the happy executor at the right-hand side with a glass of wine to celebrate.
Well, that makes me happy. I like the happy executor with a glass of wine.
And toasting the person who's died and unfortunately the person who had to die before you could perform your role.
Yeah. So last thoughts. We have 30 seconds left. So last thoughts.
If you don't have a will, get a will. If you've got a will, really review it carefully and check it out. And even for going to a lawyer to have a review of it, just to make sure there's nothing really missing, that's good. Third thing is, whether you are writing a will or not, get all of your contact information and keep it up to date. Your financial institutions, your passwords, and so on, because that's going to be happening more and more. It's going to be harder and harder to keep track of that. And you might find yourself some money. I did.
Thank you so much, Barb.
Okay, it's a pleasure.
Barb reminds us that despite her book title, Death is No Laughing Matter, there never will be a perfect time to write a will, discuss your wishes with your family members, realize you haven't got the support you need, so just do it. Because seriously, later may be too late. And you also can take a little advice from the original title of Barb's book. She mentioned it earlier, Keep Calm and Carry On. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski, and I'm here to empower you and make frugality fashionable. Bye for now.